Her mother said I wasn't good enough. My girlfriend just laughed. I planned the perfect proposal to the woman of my dreams, but the loudest sound that night wasn't my yes. It was her laugh at her mother's cruelty. Hey everyone, before we get in the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Ethan, and I am 28 years old. The velvet box felt like a lead weight in my pocket, pressing against my thigh with every step I took toward the private dining room. It was a physical manifestation of the anxiety and hope warring inside my chest. For 6 months, I had planned this moment, saving every penny from my job as a structural engineer to afford the diamond ring currently burning a hole through the lining of my suit. I had scrutinized every detail, from the reservation at the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant to the specific playlist the waiter would cue when the moment arrived. I thought I had prepared for every contingency. I had rehearsed my speech in the mirror until I could recite it without stumbling, ensuring that every word conveyed the depth of my devotion to Amanda. Amanda was the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room, not just because of her striking beauty, but because of the effortless grace she carried herself with. She was ambitious, sharp-witted, and seemingly out of my league, a fact that my insecurities whispered to me constantly, but which I tried to silence with grand gestures and unwavering loyalty. Tonight was supposed to be the ultimate proof that I was worthy of her. It was her 26th birthday, and I had invited her parents, her younger sister, and her 2 closest friends to celebrate under the guise of a simple family dinner. They knew what was coming, or at least I assumed they did. Her mother, a towering figure of high society expectations who always looked at me with a gaze that felt like an IRS audit, was seated at the head of the table. I had cleared the proposal with her father a week prior, hoping that winning the patriarch's approval would bridge the gap between his wife's obvious disdain and myself. The evening had started smoothly enough. Champagne flowed, and the laughter was polite, though I detected the usual undercurrent of condescension in her mother's voice whenever she spoke to me. She asked about my career with a raised eyebrow, subtly implying that my steady, respectable job was hardly the stuff of fairy tales compared to the investment bankers her other daughter dated. I had smiled through it, nursing my drink and reminding myself that tonight would change everything. Once I slipped that ring on Amanda's finger, once I made a formal commitment in front of her family, I would no longer be just Ethan, the guy from the middle-class background. I would be her fiancé, a permanent fixture in their world. Dessert had been cleared, and the signal was given. The waiter dimmed the ambient lighting, and the soft strains of a jazz piano drifted through the air, silencing the table chatter. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the expensive flooring. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the velvet box. I looked at Amanda, searching for a sign of encouragement. She was smiling, but there was a strange tightness around her eyes, a look I couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. I dropped to one knee, the plush carpet cushioning my kneecap, and opened the small box to reveal the solitaire diamond catching the candlelight. I opened my mouth to speak, to pour out the monologue I had memorized, but before I could utter a single syllable, a voice cut through the romantic atmosphere like a jagged knife. It wasn't Amanda's voice, and it wasn't the voice of a supportive parent witnessing a joyful milestone. It was her mother, slicing through the tension with a cold, calculated observation. She didn't even look at the ring. She looked directly at her daughter, her expression one of bored resignation, as if she were commenting on the weather. She stated, quite clearly and loud enough for the entire table to hear, that Amanda could certainly do so much better than me if she just put her mind to it. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, and heavy. I froze, my brain struggling to process the cruelty of the moment. But what shattered my heart completely wasn't the insult from the woman who had never liked me. It was the sound that followed. From the woman I was ready to spend my life with, there came a small, suppressed giggle. The sound of that giggle was a seismic event in the small universe of that table. It was short, barely lasting a second, but it reverberated in my ears with the force of a gunshot. It wasn't a nervous laugh, nor was it a gasp of shock at her mother's rudeness. It was a sound of amusement, a private acknowledgement of a joke I was apparently the punchline of. My body went numb, the blood draining from my face so quickly that the room began to spin. I remained on one knee, the ring box clutched in my hand, looking like a statue of foolishness erected in the center of the restaurant. Time seemed to warp, stretching out the horror of that single moment into an eternity. I looked up from the ring, my eyes locking onto Amanda's face, searching desperately for some sign of denial, some flash of anger toward her mother that would make this okay. Why sob broke me. Amanda was covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes dancing with a mirth that didn't match the gravity of the situation. When she lowered her hand, she wasn't looking at her mother with reproach. She was looking at me, and there was a trace of pity mixed with that amusement. It was the look one gives a child who has tried to act like an adult and failed spectacularly. The rest of the table was frozen in various states of discomfort. Her father looked down at his napkin. Her sister was staring wide-eyed at the tablecloth, and the friends exchanged awkward glances. No one spoke. No one told the mother to shut up. No one told Amanda to stop laughing. The complicity was deafening. Slowly, mechanically, I stood up. My legs felt weak, as if the bones had turned to jelly. I clicked the ring box shut, the snap echoing like a final period on a sentence I hadn't finished writing. I cleared my throat, trying to find my voice, but it felt like someone was choking me. I managed to mumble an apology, though I had no idea what I was apologizing for, perhaps for ruining the dinner or for existing a sphere where I wasn't wanted. I turned and walked toward the exit, ignoring the murmurs that finally broke out behind me. I could hear Amanda's voice, light and breathy, telling me to wait, to not be so dramatic, but I didn't stop. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the private dining room and out into the cool night air of the city. The valet attendant looked at my pale face and asked if I was all right. I nodded numbly, thrusting the ticket at him and trying to control my breathing. The ride home was a blur of city lights and tears I refused to let fall. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The humiliation was a physical weight crushing my chest. I replayed the scene over and over again, the malice in her mother's voice, the delight in Amanda's laugh. How long had they felt this way? How many family dinners had I sat through, smiling and trying to impress them, while they exchanged knowing glances about my inadequacy behind my back? I had built a life on the foundation of a lie, believing that love conquered all, believing that if I just loved Amanda enough, her family's classist snobbery wouldn't matter. But the laugh had proven that Amanda wasn't a victim of her mother's pressure. She was a participant in the judgment. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. The silence of the car was oppressive. I took the ring box out of my pocket and stared at it. It represented a year's worth of savings, of overtime, of sacrifice. Now it was just a symbol of my own gullibility. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, lighting up the dark interior. It was Amanda. I didn't answer. I watched the screen light up, fade to black, and light up again as she called back. I wasn't ready to hear her explanations. I wasn't ready to hear her tell me I was overreacting, or that her mother was just joking, or that I had ruined her birthday. The reality of the giggle was too raw, too sharp to allow for her smooth talking to soothe the wound. I turned the phone off, throwing it onto the passenger seat, and walked into my empty house, leaving the relationship and my dignity floating in the void of the night I had planned to be the happiest of my life. The morning after the proposal that never was brought with it a harsh, unforgiving light. I woke up with a headache that felt like a spike driven through my temples and a heart that fell hollowed out. For a few seconds as I blinked at the ceiling, I was just Ethan again, a 28-year-old guy with a job and a life, before the memories of the previous night crashed back down on me. The shame was instant and visceral. I rolled over and grabbed my phone, turning it on to a barrage of notifications. Text messages from Amanda, voicemails, missed calls. I scrolled through them without reading the content, just seeing the volume of her desperation. She wasn't angry. She was confused. She truly didn't understand why I had left. which was perhaps more terrifying than if she had been malicious. It meant she didn't even see the insult. I got up and made coffee, moving through the motions of my morning routine like a robot. As the coffee brewed, I leaned against the counter and forced myself to think about the relationship with the clarity that only humiliation can provide. I had always known there was an imbalance. Amanda was vibrant, social, and had a taste for the finer things that my upbringing hadn't prepared me for. When we met, I was flattered that someone like her would even look at someone like me. I had interpreted her critiques of my clothes, my car, and my apartment as helpful suggestions from a girlfriend who wanted me to be my best self. She convinced me to trade my comfortable jeans for slacks, to swap my dive bar for wine tastings, to change the way I spoke. I thought it was growth. Now, sitting in my silent kitchen, I realized it was renovation. She was trying to fix a fixer-upper she wasn't even sure she wanted to live in. I remember the times I had introduced her to my friends. She would often stand on the periphery, checking her phone, whispering to me later that they were nice but simple. She used the word simple like it was a disease. I had laughed it off, defending my friends, telling her they were genuine and loyal. She would smile patronizingly and tell me that loyalty didn't pay for vacations in the Maldives. I had brushed off these comments, focusing instead on how much fun we had when it was just the two of us, or so I thought. But was it fun? Or was I just entertaining her? I thought back to our dates. We always went to places she chose, ate food she liked, talked about topics she was interested in. My life had become a supporting role in the movie of her life. The most painful realization was the financial dynamic. I paid for everything. I paid for the dinners, the trips, the gifts. I thought it was the chivalrous thing to do, the way a man proves he can provide. But looking back, I saw it differently. She let me pay. She watched me struggle to keep up with her lifestyle expectations and never once offered to split the bill, never once hinted that it was too much. She accepted my labor as a tribute, her due. The giggle at the restaurant wasn't just about my social standing. It was about the transaction. She had been evaluating me, weighing my worth, and had found me wanting, even as I drained my bank account to prove otherwise. The mother's comment wasn't an outlier opinion. It was the verbalization of the standard Amanda held me to, one that I could never meet. I walked into the living room and looked at the photos on the mantle. There we were at the Grand Canyon, at Christmas, at her sister's graduation. In every picture, I was smiling broadly, looking at her with adoration. She was always looking at the camera or slightly away, her smile perfect, but her eyes distracted. I looked like a fan who had won a contest to stand next to his idol. I felt a surge of anger toward myself. I had sold my self-respect for the proximity to beauty. I had ignored the red flags, the constant criticism, the lack of interest in my job, the way she dismissed my family, because I was afraid of being alone. I was afraid that no one else would find me desirable. The mother's cruelty had cracked the mirror, and the giggle had shattered it, revealing the pathetic reflection I had been ignoring for 2 years. 3 days passed before I finally spoke to Amanda. I hadn't replied to her texts, but I had read them. They had gone from confused to angry to pleading. She accused me of overreacting, of embarrassing her in front of her family, of making a scene over a joke. She played the victim, claiming that her mother had just had too much wine and that I was ruining the best relationship of my life because I was insecure. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, twisting the narrative so that I, the one who had been publicly humiliated, was the villain. She never once apologized. She never once said that her mother was wrong or that she was sorry for laughing. She only wanted me to come back and smooth things over, to return to my role as the dutiful boyfriend who didn't make waves. On the 4th day, she came to my house. I was working in the yard, trying to find solace in manual labor, when her BMW pulled into the driveway. I watched her get out, looking immaculate as always, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. She approached me with her arms crossed, a look of determined annoyance on her face. She didn't ask how I was. She immediately launched into a tirade about how immature I was being. She told me I was blowing everything out of proportion, that words are just words, and that I was throwing away a future because of my fragile ego. She spoke rapidly, her voice rising, trying to drown out my silence with her logic. I stood there listening to her, leaning against my shovel. I saw her lips moving, but I couldn't hear the love I used to hang on to. I heard a woman angry that her accessory had walked off the shelf. I realized then that she didn't love me. She loved the way I made her feel, superior, pampered, adored. She loved the security I provided. But she didn't love me, the person. She didn't know my hopes, my fears, my dreams. She knew what kind of car I drove and what my credit score was, but she didn't know the man who woke up early to watch the sunrise, or the man who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends because he missed having a dog. She only knew the Ethan she had curated. When she finally stopped to take a breath, I spoke. My voice was raspy from disuse, but it was steady. I asked her if she thought her mother was right. She paused, her eyes shifting to the left, a tell she always had when she was searching for the socially acceptable lie. She said her mother was old-fashioned and protective, and that yes, maybe she had a point about us being in different places in life, but that we could work through it. She admitted it. She admitted that she thought she could do better. The confirmation was a slap in the face, but it was also a key unlocking a cage. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply nodded and told her that she should go find that better person then. Amanda looked stunned. She wasn't used to me taking a stand. She expected me to cave, to apologize, to beg for her forgiveness so we could go back to the status quo. She tried to backpedal, saying that wasn't what she meant, that she loved me, but the words sounded hollow. I told her to leave. I told her that the giggle had told me everything I needed to know about how she truly saw me, and that I wasn't interested in being with someone who waited for her mother's permission to respect me. She left in a huff, peeling out of the driveway and speeding down the street. I stood in the quiet yard, the smell of fresh earth in my nose, and felt a profound sense of peace. The chaos was gone. The performance was over. A week after Amanda drove out of my life, I found myself in a strange state of limbo. The house felt too big, and the silence was deafening, but the anxiety that had been my constant companion for 2 years was gone. I began to see the cracks in the foundation of our relationship everywhere. I started remembering specific conversations that had nagged at me at the time, but which I had suppressed to keep the peace. There was the time we were at a party, and she introduced me to her friends as Ethan. He's in construction, knowing full well I was a structural engineer. I had corrected her, and she had laughed, saying, "Same difference, sweetie." At the time, I thought it was just a silly mistake. Now, I realized it was a deliberate minimization. She didn't want me to seem too capable. She needed me to be just good enough to keep around, but not impressive enough to challenge her ego. I decided to clear out the physical reminders of her. It wasn't an act of anger, but a necessity for sanitation. I needed to detox my home of her presence. I started in the closet, pulling out the dresses she had left there, the expensive toiletries that cluttered my bathroom counter, the drawer full of her jewelry that she had stored at my place for convenience. As I bagged everything up, I found a small notebook in the back of her nightstand. It had fallen behind the drawer months ago, and I had never noticed it. Curiosity getting the better of me, I opened it. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, but more of a journal where she had listed goals, budgets, and critiques of her life. My stomach turned as I read the pages. She had a section titled Project Ethan. In it, she had listed my perceived flaws and her strategies for improvement. Posture, slouchy. Needs gym membership, he can pay. Fashion, outdated. Take him shopping for basics, use his card. Career, stable but low ceiling. Encourage promotion or push for MBA funded by him. There were entries about our arguments, always framed in a way that made her the innocent victim of my irrationality. But the worst part was the entry dated the month before. It read, "Mom is pressuring me to lock this down before I get too old, but I still feel like I'm settling. He's safe, though. If I don't find someone better by the end of the year, I'll say yes. At least I can control him." Reading those words was like touching a live wire. It wasn't just that she didn't love me. It was that she viewed me as a contingency plan. I was the safety net she would settle for if she couldn't catch the star she actually wanted. The proposal night made perfect sense now. She hadn't laughed because she was happy. She had laughed because her mother's comment highlighted the absurdity of the situation. She was about to say yes to a backup plan, and her mother had called it out publicly. The giggle was a release of tension, a shared moment of honesty between mother and daughter that cut me out of the equation entirely. I sat on the edge of the bed, the notebook in my hands, and for the first time in days, I cried. I cried for the wasted time, for the energy I had poured into a black hole, for the love I had given that was never appreciated. But then, the tears stopped, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I closed the notebook. I didn't burn it or tear it up. I placed it in the box of her things. I didn't need to confront her with it. Confronting her would imply that I cared what she thought, or that I needed her to admit she was wrong. She knew what she was doing. She knew exactly who she was. The notebook wasn't a revelation of her character to me. It was just confirmation. I taped the box shut and wrote "Return to Sender" on the side in thick black marker. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of keeping her things, nor the drama of throwing them away. I was simply putting them back where they belonged, with her. Dropping off the box of Amanda's belongings was the last loose end I needed to tie up. I drove to her apartment complex on a Tuesday evening, hoping she would be at work so I could just leave it with the doorman. As luck would have it, or perhaps bad luck, she was just walking out as I pulled up. She was with her mother. They were dressed in tennis whites, fresh from a match at the country club, looking like a match set of entitled aristocracy. Seeing her mother in person sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. This woman had masterminded the humiliation that had destroyed my relationship, but in reality, she had done me a favor. She had forced the mask off. I got out of the car with the box. Amanda stopped when she saw me, her smile faltering. Her mother turned her gaze toward me, her eyes narrowing behind oversized sunglasses. I walked up to them, feeling a sense of detachment I hadn't expected. I didn't feel the need to lower my eyes or shrink away. I looked at Amanda, and then at her mother. I held out the box. I told her I'd cleaned out the stuff she had left at my house, and I thought she would want it back. Amanda reached out to take it, but her mother interjected, asking snidely if I was done with my little tantrum. She said that Amanda had been forgiving enough to give me a second chance, and that she should be grateful. I looked at the older woman, really looked at her, and saw nothing but bitterness. She wasn't protecting her daughter. She was projecting her own shallow values onto her. I replied, calmly, that I wasn't taking a second chance. I told her that she was right. Her daughter could do much better than me. I said that Amanda deserved someone who viewed her as a peer, not a project, and that I deserved someone who didn't need her mother's permission to respect me. I told Amanda that I had read the notebook, and I knew about the project. The silence that fell over the sidewalk was absolute. Amanda's face turned a shade of pale that matched her tennis skirt. The mask slipped completely. She looked terrified, not of losing me, but of being seen. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want to see the tears or the excuses. I turned and walked back to my car. I could hear Amanda calling my name, her voice cracking, but I didn't turn around. I got in, started the engine, and drove away. I watched them in the rearview mirror, shrinking back into the distance. They looked small, insignificant. Two people trapped in a cycle of judgment and performance, measuring their worth in labels and status. I left them to it. I felt free. The anger was gone, replaced by a pitying indifference. I realized that night at the restaurant wasn't a tragedy. It was a transaction. I had paid a high price, but I had bought my freedom. The giggle had been the cash register closing the sale. 6 months later, life looked drastically different. The house had been repainted, the dull beige that Amanda had picked out replaced with a deep, rich blue that I actually liked. The spare closet, once filled with her things, was now a home gym. I had thrown myself into my work with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. The insecurity that had plagued me, the feeling that I needed to prove myself to be worthy of love, had evaporated. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to a woman who looked down on me, or a mother-in-law who judged my tax bracket. I was a good man. I was kind, I was successful, and I was enough on my own. I hadn't dated. I needed time to learn how to be myself again, to remember the things I liked before I was molded into someone else's image. I started fishing again on weekends, a hobby I had abandoned because Amanda thought it was boring. I reconnected with my friends, the ones she had called simple, and found their conversation richer and more fulfilling than any dinner party I had attended with her family. I was content. The ghost of the giggle still haunted me occasionally, usually in the quiet moments before sleep, but it no longer stung. It was just a reminder of a bullet dodged. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I ran into her. I was grabbing coffee in the city center, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, clothes I would never have dared to wear when we were together. She was alone. She looked different. Her perfection was slightly tarnished. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she didn't have that glowing, manicured polish she used to carry like a shield. She saw me, and her eyes widened in surprise. She hesitated, then walked over. For a moment, I braced myself for a confrontation, or a sob story, or an attempt to weasel her way back into my life now that her better options hadn't materialized. Instead, she just looked at me. She told me I looked good. She said I looked happy. There was no sarcasm in her voice, just a quiet observation, tinged with what looked like genuine regret. I nodded politely and told her that I was. I asked how she was. She sighed, the fight draining out of her. She admitted that things were hard. Her mother was pressuring her again about a new guy, a wealthy one this time, but she said she wasn't happy. She said she missed the way I listened to her. I listened, but I didn't engage. I didn't offer to fix it. I didn't offer to comfort her. That wasn't my job anymore. I finished my coffee and wished her well. I told her I hoped she found what she was looking for. And as I walked out of the coffee shop and into the bustling street, I realized I meant it. I hoped she found a way to value herself that didn't require tearing others down. But more than that, I realized I had already found what I needed. I had walked through the fire of humiliation, and I hadn't burned. I had been forged. The ring was long gone, sold, and the money put into a vacation fund for one, a solo trip to the mountains I had always dreamed of. I checked my phone, saw a text from a buddy asking if I wanted to grab a beer, and smiled as I typed back a resounding yes. I was no longer the guy who wasn't good enough. I was Ethan, and for the first time in a long time, I was exactly who I wanted to be.